Okay, welcome back. And we are jumping into a panel, the realities of building a 21st century website. So there's already been a bunch of great presentations that have talked about websites, and they've really talked about it from the strategic or conceptual standpoint of what is it that we need as arts organizations and arts marketers, frankly, to serve our audiences best. I think what we've heard in some other presentations are that it's not always the easiest process, and there's a lot involved. So I think it was great hearing from Thomas yesterday afternoon about San Francisco Ballet, Mohan and Diego in the morning. Juilliard Digital is actually a client of mine, so I was involved in that website project. And Christopher, as some of you may know, was involved with the Metropolitan Opera site, so both of those that they used as examples. So what we want to do now is give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what does a web project, like either of those, really entail. And that could fill a conference in and of itself. So what we are just hoping to achieve is give you a lot of food for thought and hopefully give you an opportunity to ask some questions of our fabulous panelists. So we have actually Rachel Wilkinson from Studio Theater. She's the digital marketing manager, and she was at the helm for their their website project which went live in March of 14, yeah. Right? All right. And Christina Murdy from Seattle Opera, Associate Director of Marketing there, and she again was at the helm for that website project, which went live just in July of 2015. And then Christopher Williams, if you haven't been formally introduced, he's Vice President at Capacity Interactive. He has been involved in a lot of web projects, Metropolitan Opera, Jacob's Pillow, Lincoln Center Theater, Boston Ballet, the list goes on. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I spoke with everybody here in advance, which was a lot of fun to hear your stories. And one thing that Rachel said that really stood out to me from the beginning was that website projects are a study in project management and organization, first and foremost. So I'd love to start there and kind of just first dive into what kind of leadership did it take to accomplish a website project? And by that, so who was in charge and what were the realities that they faced in terms of time, constraints, learning curve? Have at it.
Yeah, so who is in charge? That's a really interesting question. So I was the project manager on it, which meant that the artistic director was actually really driving the helm in a lot of decisions, and the director of marketing had a whole lot of influence in the project. And on top of that, I also had to balance this director of design who had very strong opinions about, this is a safe space, right? About the look and the style. And on top of that, we had an independent web development firm and an independent design firm. So in charge is like a strong way of saying that I had to be the barrier between all four of those parties.
Okay.
And I'll like balance everyone's needs and desires and also communication styles. Because I guess my point about project management was it was less about building a website and more about how do you balance a project, how do you manage so many different communication and like information processing styles, because a director of design needs very different information than a web development firm. Not the same. But yeah.
Fair enough.
So I was in charge, but that's not
great.
Not the decision maker.
So that right away, one of the first decisions people tend to make is it going to be someone in-house or not that's managing this process? So you were clearly in-house. And I'd love to hear, what did that mean from a time standpoint? And then on the heels of you, I'd love, Christina, you to jump in too about that.
Yeah, so it meant losing a full-time staff member. Like, I think we've all talked about, if you go with an in-house project manager, like, do not anticipate that they will be able to do their regular job. So I came in as sort of like the email marketing, social media manager, and some of the web content management. And towards the end there, solidly, my entire job for 2 months was just project managing the website and getting it to launch on time.
Wow. Okay. And what about you, Christina?
We were also in-house, and I was the project manager for that. I did want to just add one thing up front, that
sure.
if anybody has an IT department that thinks they're going to be in charge of the website redesign, make sure you squash that up front, because we're all here. We know that it should be, it's it's your main marketing and communication vehicle. I know there's still organizations that have IT departments that want to drive these, so that's a very bad idea. So project management, yeah, I mean, the reason that we went in-house was because I knew from a lot of projects at Seattle Opera, not just in marketing, but also finance, and everything we do seems to be really special and over the top. And every time we hire a vendor to do anything, they always say, oh, we have this out-of-the-box solution over here, and we'll just plop it on whatever Seattle Opera has. And then it never works because we have so many requirements that are needed for anything that we do. So I just felt like bringing an outsider up to speed on everything that happens in our company was going to take too long,
Sure.
and we were going to spend too much money on that. So I felt like we really needed to have it in-house. Another thing that I think is really important to think about is who is going to be responsible for the upkeep of your site in the future. Is that do you have a web producer? Do you have a staff member dedicated to that? Are you going to have to outsource that back to your vendor? Because if you don't have somebody internal or a team of people internal who were around and knew the details, it's going to become really hard to do updates later on or understand the infrastructure behind your technology. And then you're going to end up outsourcing that back to your vendor, which is fine as long as you know that up front that the end of the website project, there's still a lot of knowledge that has to be maintained around how things were set up. And I do think that's one of the benefits of an internal project manager.
Okay. And Christopher, of course, you and I have been in the role as
External
an external.
project managers.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, one of the things we learned in preparing for this presentation, I learned from Christina, which was fascinating. And now I've said this on so many calls since then that at the end of the day, like, it's actually hard for us to come into projects and manage them externally. It takes us a long time to get up to speed. But Christina raised a really interesting point that wouldn't it be more interesting if you actually decided to manage that project internally and then actually brought someone onto your team to actually sort of fill in the marketing gaps that are left open by you managing the website project, which I kind of think is the most brilliant idea ever. And I just think it's so much easier to fill that gap than bring an external person up to speed and then have that person manage all the very tricky relationships in a website project, because that's what this shit's all about, people. It is like managing relationships and managing people. Like 90% of it is that. So to do that externally, I think is really, really difficult, and you have to be really, really good at that.
So perfect segue, because managing stakeholders, that is the name of the game. And if you're not on the ground and there, it can be very tough, because when we talk about stakeholders, like you guys were pointing out, we're talking about board, executive leaders, all the way down to the people who are going to be writing copy. So I'd love to hear about what worked, what didn't, how did you succeed? What were the foundational things that were kind of tools that you could use in that?
Well, we had a core project team, which included myself, our web producer, our director of marketing, and one of the people from our ticket office, and also somebody from development. And we really, we had weekly meetings with the vendors. We were the ones that were kind of boots on the ground with everything. And one of the benefits to that was that group was the one that got buy-off up the chain. Every time there was something that we needed a decision on that we couldn't decide ourselves, it was much faster when my development counterpart could go to his boss and say, here's where we are, is this okay? And then he could get that buy-off much faster than me bringing everybody together and then making it feel like it was a marketing project. So
Gotcha.
I think that was really wise. We did not have somebody from our education department fill that role, and I can see how that already is a problem. Just in a few months, that was probably not a wise decision.
Right. How about you?
Well, I would say one of the things we've talked about is my organization is significantly smaller. We have about 35 full-time staff members, and so the project team was essentially me. But I had this buy-in from artistic leadership that allowed me to go to other departments and be like, what is this thing? I need this thing. Here's what you had before, and here's what I need from you now. So it was a lot of, we talked about the soft ask and like,
Right.
is this deadline feasible rather than this is your deadline? But
Say that again. That's really
yeah.
important.
No,
I
that's
think.
really
no,
good.
truly, like, can you accomplish this? Because also, I didn't know. I didn't have those counterparts from each department telling me, no, actually, we have the gala next week, so no, it's not, like, development can't do this. But when I phrased the question as, is this something we can accomplish, like, together, not only was I able to get buy-in from all those departments, but I was also able to, I think everyone left the process feeling not hating me.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, and I think something that's been mentioned in some other presentations is the importance of a good RFP, and that's so important when we start talking about going out to vendors. But even before that, it's a great tool for making sure people across your organization feel like they are part of the process. Can you talk about how the RFP maybe helped with that?
Well, for us, the reason that we hired an outside company to help us with the RFP was we knew there were going to be a lot of Wild West ideas from other departments that we were never going to do, but we weren't going to be able to, if I said that or the marketing director said that, it just turned into a big mess. Fight. So we made Eric and Becca those nasty calls.
Yeah, I think this is actually where an external party can be really helpful, is like having that discovery time with stakeholders and like listening calmly and patiently to all of their terrific ideas. I'm particularly gifted at doing that.
Yes.
But like that's an important step. Everyone wants to, mostly people want to just be heard.
Yeah.
Then they actually feel like they're part of the process. But then, somewhere down the line, having someone external being able to say, like, that's not going to be possible for this reason, and we're going to handle your idea in this way. It's always accepted easier, unfortunately. It's
a
just
lot of
reality.
the crazy stuff that came up, I've never even heard one word about that since then.
Yeah.
So I think
It
whatever
really is.
else
Like, people just want to be heard
just
in
wanna
that
be heard.
process.
And even after you have that, like all the crazy ideas are collected and you decide which ones you're not going to do, the RFP is so useful because it becomes like, I was so excited to hear the panels yesterday where they were talking about the discovery process and the values you select, because those are essentially become your RFP. And that is the document by which you can shoot down the crazy ideas that pop up later on.
That's right.
Because when you're thinking about project management, right, like time, resources, and quality all are going to affect things. So sticking to that RFP and recognizing that if we add these things on here, what is that going to do to the other limitations of our project? And also, like, it's just good to remind people, like, I had these meetings with my artistic director, it's like down to the wire, and I would show him the prototype, and every week he would be like, why does nothing hover? And I would go, David, we had a really serious conversation where we decided mobile was the most important thing, and you can't hover on mobile. He would go, oh, okay, great. Next week, same conversation happening again. But having that RFP and being able to be like, yep, mobile was the value we chose. That's what we're
Absolutely.
sticking to.
No, absolutely. Okay, so you have this great RFP in hand, which can be a 20-page document at times, and but as we heard from Mohan and Diego, it's so valuable to the people you end up working with. But let's talk about the process of vendors, because there's a lot of different routes, especially with arts organizations when you're dealing with e-commerce and some complicated integrations. So I'd love to hear about what route did you go? Did you use one vendor or two? And tell me about that experience of choosing.
Only one or two? More
Well,
options than that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So we're a Tessitura client, and we had previously had a completely customized website, which we coded way, way back in 2006. And actually, no, I'm sorry, 2003. I think it was that old. And we decided that we were going to move over to the Tinu third-party e-commerce platform that they have, which is not as customized. So that was definitely a decision we made early on to use a product that was easily available, wasn't going to be as expensive, but had enough of the tools that we were going to need. So that we chose that as our e-commerce platform, although our our development vendor also did a lot of custom coding as well, not financial, but other calls back to our database. And then we were also going through a major rebrand, so we had a brand agency involved, and they did some of the template designs, not all of them. I guess that's everything.
Right.
So,
Yeah, ours was pretty similar. We are also a Tessitura client. We did not choose to go with Tinu. We went with Lynch 2, which also does Mail2 and all of their, so we're pretty integrated with their products to begin with. And they have a custom API and e-commerce path. We did go with a separate design firm, which was, we were also going through this rebranding process. And I think what I said when we were first talking about this panel is from a marketer aspect, like I thought having the different design firm and different development firm was really great. Like it challenged the product. It gave us something unique that I don't think L2 would have found otherwise. But from my project manager hat, like dealing with all those stakeholders was definitely, it's a lot.
Well, and it's really hard to pick, I think, a design firm that has not worked in the performing arts. You get a lot of benefit with that because they take a new approach to it. I think some of the firms that design for arts a lot, not always, but sometimes get a little bit cookie cutter with their design. So that was nice to have a fresh approach, but then you got into really ridiculous conversations with them about things that they just have no idea how performing arts or any arts websites are. What
Right,
they're
you actually have to spend like time educating them about what a subscription is, and
Right,
what a
yeah,
renewal is. and
yeah.
what
So
a
do you have a
fixed
who our
script
audience
before
is.
the play goes up or after? Like when is the script written?
Yeah,
Right.
that gets a little bit annoying. So there was one of the things that we did, what we thought we were going to do is when we were getting our template designs from our brand agency, we were going to have these weekly calls with our development vendor, and we were going to talk through all the development implications of the design. Well, it quickly became a waste of the developer's time because I had all the same questions they would have had, and I just cut them out because it was wasting their time. I was paying billable hours for everybody on the call, and I was getting annoyed with that. So they didn't seem to mind. I think I don't think there was any big surprises later on. They were able to review it via email without having to sit on phone calls where I had to tell a 22-year-old what a subscription was for 25 minutes.
Fair enough.
Hope there's no 22-year-olds.
Yeah,
in the
no
room.
offense. So after our great presentation this morning about analytics, I think I'd love to hear about, and especially knowing how Capacity always says if it's digital, measure something, and you do data-driven decisions. Website's such a great opportunity to use that data to move the ball forward. How did you involve analytics in your process, both before, during?
Sure. So we did not have our integrated Google Analytics set up before with our old website. So I don't have a ton of data about the iteration before, but we are fully demographic, e-commerce, all of those things are turned on. I will say we moved from about 35% ticket sales on the web to we're closer to 65-70% in the course of a season now. So
something was good that you changed.
So it the old website just failed functionally.
Gotcha.
Like it was not an easy purchase path, and
Right.
my data is that it was bad.
So, Christina, I know you though did integrate some good.
Yeah, we did do an analytics project early on. I think it was after we selected our vendor, I think. I can't actually remember now. But one of the things that we learned has to do with something you were talking about this morning about the homepage entrances versus other entrances. And we found that out as well, that I don't know, maybe like 20% of our entrances were on our homepage, and a big vast majority of them came in on our production pages. So that helped us not only use analytics to decide the hierarchy on that page, but also moved the production detail or the production page as the very first template was designed. That was the first template that was revealed to anybody, our artistic director, marketing director, everybody. We started with that, and that really emphasized to people, this is the most important page of our site. So we're going to start the whole design project with this.
We actually use that same approach on LCT and also on the Met. We started with the production detail page and then moved out from there. Which I think is it's a focusing on the pages that you know where the majority of visitors are going.
Right.
Another thing I would say about analytics is really making sure that you have that line item in your development budget, so you don't forget about how important that is. And I mean, one of the things that happened with us is we had, I think, just like a standard Google Analytics integration as a line item, but we didn't have the Tag Manager installation. So that ended up being a change order later on because we really wanted to have that included.
Well, and that leads into the idea of trade-offs too in budget, and because budgets are finite, and I think what we all like to think is we're going to get this shiny new website, it's going to solve everything, and it's going to be everything we ever hoped and dreamed it would be. But after talking with you, what I think is so experienced from my own experience, from what Christopher's gone through, is that you have to realize from day one there's going to be some things you can't accomplish, and so there's prioritization. So talk to us about how did you approach that, and how did you then keep track and make sure you manage your budget so that the things you did want stayed on track?
I mean, definitely. We very early on developed this mechanism. We were founded in 1978, so we've got a significant amount of history, and one of our priorities was having that history on the website. And it became very clear that in the course of the 3 months where things were like very, very intense up until launch, like that 35 years worth of history wasn't going to be populated digitally, because it is all stored in like paper form at the University of Maryland's archives. So this idea of having a production history project very quickly became the tool by which I was able to say, so launch is March 31, then we have phases afterwards. Like that is not the end date, because we have already agreed that we're going to do this big project that's years and years worth of history, and like now I've got a database loaded on my back end of my CMS that has got like 2,500 different individuals who have worked on every production through all of the years, like loaded into it. And it's just, you have to recognize the phases and that they happen. Like,
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
And budget for them.
Right.
Yeah. I think for us, probably the biggest trade-off was when we decided to use the third-party e-commerce platform and not code something ourselves. So we definitely lost some flexibility with what we were able to accomplish online. We lost control. We had to give that up. We gained quite a bit as well, and I think we gained more in the long run. But that was definitely something we gave up. Another thing in terms of budgets is I think one of the reasons we didn't have to make a lot of really awful decisions in the middle of the project is because I had saved almost 35% of the development cost as change order money. So that way I didn't have to be running back to the executive director in the middle of the project every week and a half, which is how often you're going to get something that says this is out of scope and it's 20 hours or 40 hours or however much it is. So we had that available to us, which is really big.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Our vendors were really flexible when those things would pop up, and often exchanged other pieces of scope that we were sort of like, well, if we're looking at this, which is the bigger priority, and what are we going to do instead of?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think on the topic of change orders, one of the things I always see in projects up front is people sort of needling the beginning of their relationship with a vendor, sort of like during the SOW phase. And one of the things that I'm always cautioning clients about is that at some point you're going to need to ask that vendor for several favors, sort of on this change order topic. So it's really important, I think, in those early days of building the relationship with the vendor. And let's face it, you're going to be in that relationship for like a year or more if you're going to continue that relationship. So it is important, but like, at some point you're going to ask those people for favors. So, and even beyond those favors, there are going to be change orders. So I think it's important to consider that when you're making those initial negotiations as well. But I actually think that's brilliant, like putting that much money aside, because it does keep you from having to like go outside your sphere to ask for permission to make those change orders, and it keeps your project on track.
Right. And I thought it was a bold but smart choice that you guys made. You shared that you actually lost some of the functionality when you made that switch to TNU. And, so that was something, I'm sure there were some people who weren't as thrilled about that, but that you kind of had the long-term picture, in your mind.
Right.
And I think that's a sign of a good project manager. But how have you been happy with that decision that you made? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, we're happy with it. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to do it is because over the last we redesigned our site in 2007, and since then the only thing we had spent our money on was e-commerce related. Every time we had something weird that we needed to be able to sell online, we had to build it, and it was between $10,000 and $20,000 to build that. We never changed templates. We never looked at analytics to revise navigation. We didn't do anything else to optimize our site, really. I mean, we did videos and things like that, but no big changes were made from a content perspective. And that's one of the things I'm really hoping to shift going forward, is that we should be able to spend a larger portion of our budget really making a difference in the type of content that we're putting out there and what's working, being able to be more responsive to whatever the latest thing is, Snapchat.
Snapchat,
Snapchat, yeah.
which Rachel is light
I
years
was
ahead of us
snapping
on
earlier.
already.
Oh,
They're making
she
fun of
was.
me. It's fine.
Well, Kim teed it up perfectly, and I think that you guys are all convinced that having a mobilely responsive site is just not even a question anymore. It is. And but I think there's a lot of mythology around responsive sites, and I think there's some expectations that go askew. And so I'd love for you guys to talk about that process of switching towards a responsive site. And Christopher, I don't know if you want to kick
I'm
off.
happy to start. I just think one of the things that I've learned time and time again with different projects is like, you have to let go of like pixel perfection once you go responsive.
Yeah.
It's just simply not possible. There are going to be, like the whole idea is that the thing shifts between devices. So like it never will be pixel perfect, and it's something that people have a hard time learning, but it is a reality going into those projects
Yeah.
with responsive sites.
We still have templates that do not work correctly, especially when you shift it,
Orientation.
the orientation, and I mean, we're still working on it. I don't know
Okay.
whether we'll be able to fix it, but yeah, the photos, it's just really hard to get all the content exactly
Yeah.
the way you want. And it does not work the way the design Photoshop files appear that it's going to.
Well, and
Never
a lot
works
of it's-
that way.
A lot of it is related to text, like where text is going to flow when you move to a mobile device in a way that you might not like, especially if like you're old school and you really value typography like I do. Like you lose control of that, and that's just something that you have to let go of.
Absolutely.
We've done a lot of because we have a front end developer on our staff. We've done a lot of suppressing of text in mobile formats.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Which you probably
great.
don't like if you're a type person.
No, I think
but
it's actually great because
Yeah.
it means it's going to look better.
it looks
Yeah.
better. So, or
Yeah.
we write the copy in a way that the most important thing is in the first
I
5
think that's
words,
terrific.
and then it cuts off, and after that it doesn't display on mobile.
Yeah, I think we
Right.
had a session where a speaker talked about that last year, actually.
Yeah. So, even the way we talk about website projects has started to shift a lot. And, the idea of having a shiny new website every 3 to 5 years, that's really sort of the old way of thinking. It's something Eric has espoused, and I'm sure you guys have heard a lot. And so this idea of iteration about, sort of the Amazon model, Amazon's landing page is always changing. That's really sort of the new way of looking at things. And in some ways that can be a letdown because you work so hard on this project and you get to primary launch and then you realize there's still so much to do, and whether it's multiple phases or just that process of adopting iteration. So I'd love to hear number one, just what was the reality of once you launched the site, what was left, and how many phases did you have, and then also have you moved towards an iterative approach?
Yeah, I would say 100% we are still working on it. It's never really done. I have a standing meeting with our senior staff members once a month to review the priorities we set previously and re-examine if they are still the priorities for the things that we want to get done at the time. Because, we've been talking so much this weekend about being content heavy, and we want to move to a place where we are like a content platform, and we'll get there.
Yeah, if I'm going to do any of that stuff from yesterday, I have to redo all of my production templates because none of it's going to work very well with that, which is fine. I think, one of the things I would say about that is in terms of your budget moving forward, there's a lot of elements to that. So for us, I look at how much am I going to need for just maintenance and bug fixing. And if you have a really old site like we did, you might not have been doing very much bug fixing in the last couple of years because you'd gotten rid of all the bugs after 7 years of fixing them all. So we, in the first 4 weeks after we launched our site, had over 100 hours of bug fixing that we did. That was outside of our warranty. So these were
Wow.
things that were out of scope or things that we scoped wrong. So it wasn't like our vendor was saying, we're not fixing any of that. There was also a whole slew of warranty bugs that they were fixing.
Right.
So this was other things, and I think we're still doing over 100 hours a month at this point. And
Wow.
we're 3 months into it. So there's a huge amount of maintenance budget that's needed after you go live. And then we also have project budgets for bigger things as well. And I'm hoping I'll still have some money for some analytics later this year, but if I keep on pace with my 100 hours a month, that's probably not going to happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think everyone saw the Met Opera, the design comps that Diego showed and everything. And maybe Christopher, you can talk a little bit about that. Of, it looks beautiful, but what was the reality of that launch, and how many there were bugs, I'm sure.
I mean, so many bugs. It just is a reality, and it's a reality, depending on the size of your site. And if you haven't ever worked on a project like this, or you haven't done it in a while, the amount of time you have to set aside to test, just even before bugs, it really can be so much more time consuming than you can possibly imagine. And I think that in the testing before the first Met phase, I think we had 500 and something different bugs that had to be fixed, just that were discovered from testing. And I think it's so important to remember that that's a step that you're going to have to go through, especially if you're not necessarily on like a TNU where you've done custom API integration with your ticketing system.
Well,
it's even more
we had
complicated.
375 and we had TNUs.
High five, sister. It's painful. It's nice to check them all off, but
No,
Yeah.
I mean, when you upgrade Testatura, you need to go
right,
through it again.
happens again.
like,
Yeah.
Before, during, after, continuing.
Yeah.
It's
But
literally
then-
constant.
Also budgeting for like the fatigue. So like you get through all those bugs, you launch your site, but like you're just not done. Like you're going to keep making those changes, but it's about making sure that you and your team and all the people that are involved in your project are like, managing like the fact that this is a fatiguing process. It's just not something that's regularly part of your job.
Yeah, one of the things that we did that was super helpful that actually Eric had told us about was making sure that we have time for building the pages, because our old site was not built on a CMS, so we weren't used to this whole idea of a CMS,
Right.
and he had suggested that we have some staff allocation for that. So I had a production artist come in for about the last 6 weeks or so before launch to actually build pages. A lot of that was porting content from our old site to our new site. Some of it was content other people were writing. But what that freed us up to is the 5 or 6 core team members, their focus was on the templates and the testing and making sure things work. And if we didn't have that person to build all those pages for us, then all of us would have been doing that, and we wouldn't have tested any of those
Right.
things. That was
100%.
huge.
And I think you had mentioned that too, about
Yeah.
the copy, the amount of time that took.
We had, basically, the old website we just destroyed. Like,
Oh, you
didn't-
rewrote from scratch?
yeah, I did not want anything to do with that. You all can go on the Wayback Machine and take a look. It's not great, but the layout of our new site was so different, so radically different, that I hit this point where eventually I went to our literary department. And I was like, I need help managing all of the copy and content that, frankly, we need to recreate to just get into the new site, and it was very time consuming. And fortunately, the literary department really stepped up and helped
That's
me
wonderful.
out.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to outsource,
Yeah.
that kind of copywriting.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, a priority was to make sure, we know you guys have a lot of questions, so I'd love to, first of all, thank our panelists for their thoughts, but also open it up now and let you guys start asking some questions.